am Lev Grossman. I'm Lev Grossman. And you are Sera Gamble.
Yeah, and we know each other because of a book you wrote, a series of books you wrote.
Which you turned into a TV show.
I am among the people who did, yeah. So Lev wrote The Magicians, among other beautiful things, but The Magicians is what brought us together. And you're also a journalist, yes?
Yes, although less of one than I used to be. I was like a real journalist for 15, 16 years, but I have not written much lately.
You've come over to the dark side.
Yeah, I sort of burned out a little bit on journalism, so it was the dark side for me. I mean, all the sides are dark. Maybe even, screenwriting is even darker than journalism.
It might be, but also you get to see people make your movie sometimes.
Oh, that has happened to me one time so far, but it was great. I would love to do that again.
When is the first time you ever went to a set where the set existed because of something you wrote? Was that Magicians?
Yes, that was Magicians.
Do you remember how that felt?
It was a really special feeling. It was a really good special feeling on so many different axes. Writing is a famously an isolating activity and profession. I would say doubly so for me in that I don't socialize with writers very much. It is rare that I talk to another writer. I don't know why. I don't know why that is. I live in New York City, which is just crammed full of writers. So I wrote The Magicians in conditions of such total isolation for lots of personal reasons. So to come someplace where people were gathered together to tell that story in a new way was just unbelievably intoxicating. And the whole business of writing fiction, I mean, it can be challenging to believe in your own fiction. You get up in the morning and you sit at the desk and you're like, okay, let's pretend that there's a castle called Castle Whitespire. I just made it up. I just came up with that name. The task of writing is on some level the task of believing in that and being real. And every morning you have to make it up in your head. To come to a place where it had been built structurally and I could lean against it and knock my knuckles against it and have it just be there, that was a cool feeling.
Though famously in season 1, our budget had been stretched so far that I was like, here's how we're doing the castle. There's an invisibility spell on it because we can't afford to build it. I have to say, whenever you came to set on the show, it was like God had arrived. The actors would get really nervous before you walked onto set, and I would hear the whisper pass through all of the crew, and it's like the God of the world has arrived.
I knew that I was making people uncomfortable. And I was like, I probably shouldn't go because everyone's going to feel weird.
Oh, no, it was a good kind of uncomfortable. It was exciting. It was like your presence, more than anyone else's, was the thing that reminded people that what they were doing wasn't just goofing off. People walk by on like hooves with tails and horns, or, they're holding some weird prop and we're saying it's made of magic. And like, that can go a lot of ways. It can get kind of goofy, but yeah. There's something elevated about your books that I think it excited people to go to work because it elevated the material.
And there was something that I knew and like somehow by definition only I could know, which was that it was as much your guys' as it was mine.
So I know you've covered this ground before, but can we talk about it just a little bit? Like you wrote this amazing essay about writing The Magicians, kind of about how you came to this point in your life where you were able to unlock this part of your brain as a writer. I mean, correct me if I'm interpreting it wrong, but it's almost like you gave yourself permission to write that kind of story.
It happened, 15 years into my career as a writer, 15 years, banging my head against like the limits of my talent and my mental health. And then something broke. I think the key for me that unlocked so many things was precisely the act of writing something that felt forbidden. Like they'll never let me get away with this. Somewhere there's like a nerve center, a headquarters, and all of the lights on the dashboard are flashing red, and someone's saying, no, he can't do that. That feeling that just they'll never let me get away with this. It was an amazing feeling and a new feeling, and it was just so profoundly energizing. And for me, it was two things. It was writing fantasy. I had imagined myself as a realist literary writer, and I had myself all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I just had the wrongest idea about who I was and where my voice was and what I had to say. I didn't understand anything about any of those things. Fantasy was something that I had always loved, but it was a forbidden love. And I think I had spent a lot of time in my life associating with people who were very literary and very committed to very specific ideas about fiction, about realist fiction and what that meant. To write fantasy was to go against all of that. And at the same time, I felt as though I was breaking a ton of rules within the fantasy genre. I was doing things which, it's not that nobody had ever done them before, but they hadn't been done that much. Like, taking this very English genre and resetting it in America, taking what had been a sort of middle grade shading into young adult genre and writing it in a very adult way, with sex in it and swearing and drugs and drinking and stuff like that. I felt as though I were breaking some of the conventions of fantasy, and I never want to write anything ever again without breaking rules, because now I understand that that's the whole point of everything.
That is the point of everything.
Not maybe everything, but
no, I think I'm going to get that fucking needle pointed on a pillow and put it in my office. I think you're absolutely right.
Driving, for example, but writing, it's definitely the point of writing.
Not operating heavy machinery. Fantasy has been traditionally viewed mostly as a little less important than other kinds of fiction, right? Is that what we mean when we say we're breaking the rules?
I think it's fair, and you can obviously find many counterexamples.
Mm-hmm.
But something definitely happened, and it happened in the early 18th century, where literature became heavily identified with realism. Everything fantastical became pushed into these marginal places, into fairy tales, into children's literature, into the Gothic, horror, stuff at the margins. Before that, Shakespeare, Spencer, Dante, Milton, Homer, all of these writers, fantasy had been central to their work, not separable from it. But somehow it was separated out at that moment in cultural history, and then placed on the margins in this way that I still don't fully understand why.
But the thing that I find really resonant about what you're saying, because, my parents were educated in Europe. My dad brought a lot of snobbery about what it meant to be a writer and what kind of literature I should be reading. And at the same time, my first memory of him is of sitting on his lap watching Star Trek. So both things were true of him too, but he was a perfect example of someone who was sort of old world about it. And he would not have considered it as, worthy an endeavor, maybe, for me to try to write Star Trek. I can enjoy that and then do something more elevated with my talent, was sort of the mandate that I internalized when I was little. I think you're describing something that a lot of young artists experience, which is that we have this idea of the kind of work we're supposed to do, and it ends up getting between us and our own potential.
It turned out there were so many things that were about myself that I had trouble accepting, which is a really bizarre and pathetic thing for someone to say, who is a straight, white, cis, heterosexual guy. Both straight and heterosexual, both of those things. And yet, even then, there were bits of myself that I had trouble looking at directly. Mm-hmm. And it took me a really long time and some sort of heavy personal shocks to get in touch with, which is a sort of a strange thing. And that's what The Magicians is about. It was that for me, and it's also about that experience of finding that side of yourself that you didn't believe existed.
I'm not really surprised to hear you say that. I don't think there should be any apology attached to that when guys talk about feeling constrained and limited in the same ways. It's not, I think, the exclusive provenance of people who are considered other than that in whatever way. There's the secret that we know now. I'm wondering if you were discovering this while you were writing Magicians, which is that the tools of writing fantasy cut directly into these psychological states we're talking about. To me, it's keys that unlock these doors so quickly and with so much spectacle. I can talk about all of the stuff that's hard for me to talk about when it's just two people on a farm,
I want to quote that great Kafka quote about, I'm going to get it wrong, but something about, as a way of describing writing, it is taking an axe to the frozen sea inside you. He could really turn a phrase, that Kafka guy. Everyone's frozen sea, I think, is the same, but the axe is probably quite different. And for me, that was the axe. I mean, I had a weird year. When I was 35, I had a very weird year when a lot of different stuff happened to me. I had my first child. It was a big opening up experience for me, and I started having therapy for the first time, and I split from my longtime partner. I mean, just a whole bunch of stuff happened in that year. And I read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which was a big, big personal milestone for me. And I started writing Magicians. So I had a year where everything kind of gave at once. Magicians was part of that, and it was also about that moment where Quentin can't stop. He finally gets out of his own way for a moment, and all this power rushes out of him, and it was always there, and something in him was hanging on so tightly to it and wouldn't let it go. And then in that moment of stress and anger and everything else, it all comes out. That was in The Magicians, and it was a description of me writing The Magicians. There was a frozen sea under the frozen sea, as it turns out.
It's
a fun like that. I mean, was there a moment for you when it all just broke loose?
I've experienced a lot of moments of little tiny dams breaking inside of me, because I started mostly writing poetry, and there's a flow you can get into where the language is sort of lining up with the feeling in a way that's really rewarding as it's happening. It's that's my most direct feeling of being connected to something bigger than myself. But the thing you're talking about which is about being a more fully formed writer with more of a skill set and more discipline and having a breakthrough that takes you more to the work you're meant to be doing. I was working on Supernatural for a bunch of seasons. And when I left that show, it sort of like deposited me directly into a script deal, which is kind of how that tends to work. So I started developing immediately. I hadn't really had a rest. And so I wasn't overthinking this very much. And I immediately signed on to do 2 pilots. And one of them was about a military town. I didn't know that much about the military. My goddaughter's dad was in the Navy, so he was helping me. But I was trying to find just a subject matter to put at the center of it that would enable me to write a like Friday Night Lights style, small town where everyone's connected kind of thing. And he named a case and he said, you should Google this. And it sent me down a rabbit hole about sexual assault in the military. I mean, something like 1 out of 3 women in the military is sexually assaulted at some point. It's a huge pervasive problem. It's not even gendered. It's just a huge pervasive problem. And I immediately knew this is what I was going to write. I also kind of knew it meant the show would never get on the air. And I woke up the next day convinced I had to quit. Like, I can't write this. I don't know enough about the military. By the way, I had not made that connection at all, that it was because it had hit on this subject matter that was really going to push me a lot as a writer. And so I did it. I did it to the best of my ability. And I came out of it really understanding that telling a story like that was part of like the point of writing at all for me, was to write about stuff that is so upsetting about the human condition, about what people are capable of doing to each other, that like I will never really be able to fully explain it in writing, but I don't want to stop exploring and looking for the answers. I felt really changed as a person in trying to write this from all of these different points of view. And then honestly, the next time I got the chance was when we worked on Magicians in telling Julia's storyline. That was just like, oh, okay, I'm just sort of feeling something inside of me that's like, oh, this is a reason to do all the blood, sweat, and tears. Can we talk about the weirdness of being an author whose stuff gets adapted? There are people who are going to watch this who are looking for their niche and their path. And it's sort of the holy grail for some authors to have their material optioned. But I think there's also a lot of fear about what that really feels like when it happens.
I wanted the Magicians to be adapted. And yet there's something profoundly cliche and yet true, something profoundly narcissistic about the business of writing novels, which is really just about the least collaborative medium that you can think of. Like most narcissists, I wasn't aware of my narcissism. When you're a novelist, you know, you figure out the costumes and you sort of describe the line readings, and you do all the dialogue and all the characters are you. And the transition from that to having other people write for your characters, having actors interpret the lines, having actors have the gall to have their own faces, which they put on your characters. You know, I mean, it was a real wake-up call and difficult for me to metabolize. I had to get over myself, and I think that I did. It was definitely challenging.
I mean, you were always really gracious about it.
I don't think I was always. I can remember some moments of ungraciousness, which we will skate over lightly. I think I probably didn't signal to you all the times when you took the characters to places that I never, ever could have taken them, and how amazing it was to watch that. Arjun was a big part of learning to trust you guys, though, because Arjun was such a colossal success as Penny, and I didn't get it at all. I think I was actually even there for Arjun's audition. Maybe I'm hallucinating this, but I came for one day of auditions, and I'm sure that he was there. Mm-hmm. And then after the fact, you guys said, "Oh, that guy, we're gonna do his Penny," and I was like, you know, what? But he was so fantastic, and he just brought the character to this fascinating place, and his dynamic with Quentin was in some ways so much more complex and exciting.
I mean, the character's not like that in the book, but he's being reported on by a protagonist who dislikes him. So that's where, as a reader of the book, I'm interpreting it as, oh, Quentin's lying. Penny's probably really sexy. I should say, for those keeping track, you never wrote a script for Magicians. We sent you the material and you gave us notes on outlines and scripts and cuts. But at a certain point, you started writing screenplays. Is there a connection?
The experience of writing for the screen, after having watched you and John and all the writers write Magicians, I mean, that was my education in screenwriting, was watching you guys do that. And yet my voice as a screenwriter is very different from yours. The rhythms of the storytelling are very different from the way you guys did it on Magicians, which was, I think, one reason why I never pushed to write for the show, which I thought about doing. But I have so much trouble with plot. I have so much trouble with plot. And you guys wrote so much plot. I mean, there's 3-4 plots going on, running simultaneously in every episode. And you guys just chew through so much narrative. I don't know, where does it all come from?
A room with 8 people in it. I mean, I don't think any one person could probably someone could. I couldn't juggle all of that myself. There's so many characters, and then everybody's generating for each of them, and then we cherry pick. I'm wondering how we can turn this into something that so many writers watch this it's sort of like you're rooting around for the little treasure that you can take and be inspired and go write for a few hours, or pick something up that you've put down. Like if you had to prescribe a way to give yourself permission to do something that breaks the rules, like get mission control to start sounding all the emergency alarms.
It all starts with irritation. So much of me, it starts for me with reading books or watching things and feeling irritation. There's a half truth that people are passing off as a whole truth. You know, there's just an open doorway that people are pretending is shut. And they just walk by it over and over again. Oh my God, just go down there. Oh, you have no idea what's down there. Just go in there. I treasure those moments of irritation because it's always a portal there. Whenever you feel that irritation, like it's a petty, touchy feeling. I'm trying to think of an example of one. I mean, the very fact that Harry Potter, I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, but it annoyed me that Harry himself, he never read fantasy novels. He had spent 11 years trapped in this cupboard by himself in this abusive family. Why weren't books his lifeline? Why did he not simply read the Chronicles of Narnia over and over again forever? But when he gets to Hogwarts, it's like he's never read a fantasy novel. When I was writing Magicians, it was sort of like, oh, well, obviously this is a chance for me to just pull that little thread that's sticking out and see what's there. And out of that came all the fillery and all of Quentin, really. Just sort of the fact that I thought Harry Potter ought to have read more. And then if he had read a lot, all his ideas about what a school for magic would be like would have been shaped by fiction. And when he went there, he would have been confronted with a very different reality. And so it becomes a whole story about fiction and reality and trying to negotiate between the two. But it started with this just little sense of irritation that Harry ought to have read Narnia and he hadn't.
I love this so much, that this is the feeling that you're looking for. It's not necessarily the elevated feeling of being inspired because the muse has come to tea, but rather you see something and you feel fucking petty about it. It's just like, and then what's beautiful about it is it might start with Harry Potter would have read Narnia. And it's really weird that is not present in the Potterverse. And then pretty soon you have snowballed into the Greek gods are all rapists. The idea that we should be worshiping a god is ridiculous because every world is fucked up.
Part of it is just when you get up in the morning, sometimes the muses simply are not singing and you just can't get to that place, that transcendent place. But you can always get to being annoyed. Always. Irritation, it never fails me. It's always there for me.
I mean, you're really giving the people diamonds right now because this is such an actionable observation you're making about yourself that like, literally, someone is sitting on the couch. They broadly know the kind of stuff they want to write. They are claiming that they have writer's block or they don't know what to start. Go look at some stuff. And when you watch something and you think that's stupid and it was done poorly, just go do that better. Just go do it the way you think the first people should have done it.
I promise, I'm breaking the fourth wall now. I'm saving you 15 years of frustration and failure because I looked in all the wrong places. That would have been a good place to start.
I mean, I think it's really common. I was the same. I thought things had to be wildly original in all ways or don't bother. Like if I'm not inventing a whole new realm or world to be in, then people are just going to dismiss it as a repetition of something that's been done before. But especially the way that you're describing it, everything really relies on the execution. It's just about getting really specific about what you care about inside of that planet of the idea.
You've written poetry. Did you ever write a novel? Did you ever start a novel?
I sort of have started them, but I haven't really. I mean, not since I've been a grown-up who is a writer. I mean, I have to admit, I also do think of them as existing in slightly rarefied air. I don't know. Sometimes I daydream about just like doing one of those novel sprints. You know, they have the novel writing month and stuff, just to do it in a really unprecious way. Do you have any advice? So if I told you like, okay, I'm going to take a hiatus and write a novel, skip me over some bullshit.
Well, it's like that moment that you alluded to earlier, that moment when you're not overthinking things. It's so tough to catch yourself at that moment. It's so often, it's not the thing it's in front of you, it's in the thing that's in the corner of your eye. It's so often the B project. The Magician started as so many good things, possibly everything ever good that I've ever done. It started as the thing I wrote to take my mind off the thing that wasn't working. It's so often how you get at the good stuff. My children are absolutely shrieking. I don't think anybody's actually killing them. I think they're being put to bed. It's just the COVID nightmare has been it's exacerbated by the presence of children in one's house, I must say.
How's that going?
My writing window has shrunk to about 2 hours a day.
Is there a reduction in your productivity? I mean, that might be a stupid question, but if you were writing 8 hours and now you're writing 2, can you see that the pages have slowed down?
Yeah, they really slowed down. I had a day job for so many years. I didn't quit my day job until the end of 2016. So basically 4 years ago. I wrote All Magicians with a 40-hour-a-week job. So I was very used to walking around thinking of things, running scenes in my head while I was doing something else. And I sort of had to go back to doing that a little bit. And then so when you're actually at the keyboard, everything's very concentrated and ready to go. You've built up all this energy, but nothing's the same as getting even 3-4 hours uninterrupted time.
To just go back to what you said, so you had a 40-hour-a-week job. At least one of those children.
By the end of it, all of them, all 3 of them.
When do you write in a world where you have a family to take care of and a 40-hour-a-week job? How do you stay committed to your writing project?
A very great writer once quoted to me, books are written with time stolen from other people. So true. It's so true. You really feel that. You're just ignoring your little children. And there are 3 or 4 or 7 or 9 or 15, and you'll never have that time back. And yet you have to write something sometime. Part of it forces you to feel like, I have to make this count. I have to make this count. And my child really wants to be with me, and I really want to be with them, but I'm not. And so for God's sake, this had better be worth it. It focuses the mind.
At least you're not on Twitter for those hours.
I'm on Twitter too. Twitter's my other child. It's my other baby. I'm on Twitter more. I love on Twitter.
That kid's an asshole.
That's fine. I never talk about writing. I said this before, but I never talk about writing. I'm not really friends with that many writers. Nobody wants to hear about your writing, especially your family. Your family doesn't want to hear about your writing. Not even your cat wants to hear about your writing.
The artistic process in general, hearing about it isn't for everybody, but it can be for people who want to have an artistic process.
I'm crazy about TV writing because I pretend to do it, and I'm such a fraud. It's so terrible, my fraudulent TV writing.
Wait, why do you say that?
Because I don't know what I'm doing. I never trained to write for TV. I never studied it.
Me either. I mean, I read a book. No, I didn't. There were no books about TV writing. I watched TV.
But how did you learn? Didn't you feel like a fraud when you first started? Because I feel like a fraud now.
I felt like someone who was like learning someone else's choreography. I remember writing our first set of specs when we were going to break into TV because, I had written a couple screenplays. That's how I got an agent with my then writing partner. And there's a treasure trove. You can read Sid Field, you can read Blake Snyder. There's a lot of really great books. Maybe there's a lot on TV, but there weren't 15 years ago. We just literally got some copies of 6 Feet Unders and Nip Tucks and whatever was around then. Other people's originals. Somebody gave me a Charlie Kaufman pilot that never got made, and I read that. And I
saw it all day. I Googled for PDFs of scripts.
I didn't go to film school or anything, though. And I actually remember... So, we wrote these samples. It got us meetings. We're like meeting with showrunners. We're talking as intelligently as possible about like, here's what I think is great about the script of yours that I read. And do I feel like a fraud? I just feel like so day one, just an interloper who has slipped in the door. And I'm trying to somehow hit on what people are supposed to say in this instance. And then the night before our first day in the writer's room, because I had never been an assistant, I had never been in a writer's room, our agent calls to wish us luck. And I say, so what happens in a writer's room? Like, the line just goes silent because she doesn't even know how to answer the question. She's so embarrassed for me.
Oh my God, I've had so many of those moments.
So I walked into the first day on a writing staff not really knowing what it was going to be. I've said this before, but like I was afraid to get up and go to the bathroom. Like I sat there needing to pee really bad for most of that day because no one else was getting up. I was like, am I going to get fired if the fucking youngest person in the room just gets up and leaves because she has to pee? By season 5, most of the writers in the room on The Magicians had started as our assistants. Some of them went to film school and some of them just want to be in the business and are willing to fetch coffee and work their way up the ladder. And they're writing the best possible specs they can and originals they can. When we give them their shot, when we say, you're going to co-write this one, which is your way of like, if you do that and you don't fuck it up, maybe if there's a spot, you'll get promoted the next season. They have somebody holding their hand. A lot of what we're judging is just hunger. at that point. Just hunger. And like, if I explain something to you, are you listening and will it be better the next time? It's not like they get handed a manual and then they're supposed to replicate it and ta-da, then their script is a professional TV writer script. They do the best they can. We rewrite them a bit. They get in the room, and I've seen it enough seasons now where I usually can feel the moment when a writer on staff graduates from doing a lot of pieces of being a TV writer really well to suddenly seeing The Matrix. I hate to be a downer, but all it is just they put in the hours.
Yeah.
They take a lot of really hard notes for like 4 or 5 scripts, and then suddenly they turn in a script and I'm like, oh my God, this scene starts like the latest it could start. And it ends the soonest it could end. And like the most happens in it. And there's no extra conversation just to be clever. It's like, just there's a moment where they get it. That probably didn't help at all.
The Matrix. I feel like I see it and then I lose it again.
It's possible that what's going on with you is that you are an experienced enough writer that you're seeing more problems sooner.
That'd be nice. That'd be nice if that were true. I'm trying to do this pilot for Amazon and I've rewritten the script. I actually wonder how many times I've rewritten it. We're high double digits, and actually I'm glad I don't know how many times it's been. I'm not sure. Maybe it never gets easier. I don't know.
I know it doesn't get easy.
Yeah.
I think it gets a little easier than what you're describing.
Definitely true with novels. It never gets any easier. There's a little bit of bullshit that you can skip, but it's amazing how many times you can make the same mistakes, and amazing how many times you can invent new mistakes to make, and then take ways to solve them.
Do you plan and or beat sheet or outline in the case of scripts and in the case of books?
I plan everything. I'm a poor improviser. I need the structure of an outline to work with. And occasionally I'll riff a little bit. And it's always the best stuff. Always the best stuff.
So we've established that you're a New York Times bestselling writer, yet it's still hard.
Yeah,
weirdly. I feel like this makes people feel better.
I hope it does. I hope that people are experiencing schadenfreude.
Not that way, not like fuck that guy, but like, I don't know, we could have picked a simpler pursuit, I think.
Ironically, the whole business of writing is to make it look natural and easy. I mean, that is the whole job, is to make it all look tossed off and to just plaster over the cracks and erase all the footprints and make it look like it was just one shot, pure intention.
That's the rewrite.
Yeah.